Hello, welcome to this video about fossils. So in the overworld, fossils will spawn between Y levels 40 to 49, and they'll spawn in either the swamp or the desert. Now there's 4 different skeletons, and the skeletons, most people believe that they're either ravagers, some sort of auroch creature, ancestor of the cow. So let's look at the 4 different skeletons. So these are the skull blocks. So I've put very large. They come from the folder, the structure folder fossil, and it's skull 1 to 4. And I'll tell you why I put very large when we look at the Nether fossils, which just got added in the 1.16 update. So this is the very large skull. Then we have the large skull here, the medium skull, and finally the small skull. So the skulls, and here we have these spines that, again, they're added in the swamps and the deserts. So that's swamp, swamp hills, desert, desert hills, desert lakes. So here we have the very large spine. That's number 4. So the opposite way around. And those are pretty big structures. It's the biggest fossil in the whole game. The spine 4, the very large one. And then we have the large spine, the medium spine, and the small spine. Now in the 1.16 update, we got these things, which are the ribs. So these are only found in the Soul Sand Valley in the Nether. It's unlike the overworld fossils. These are often visible. These are all the ones here. I just want to make a little point here about the ribs. So we could say this is 3 sets of small ribs. I actually named this myself. I didn't get it off the wiki, just by looking and analysing what had happened. Because we know that a small rib is 3 high, and then there's 1 block here. And this makes sense with what I've done up here, which is the medium one. So we can say the medium one is 4 high with 1 there. Then the large is going to be 4 high with 2. And then the very large is 6 with 2. And it's very likely that if we just take a skull, the very large, and very large ribs, and then we'll also have a very large rib cage, which is actually this guy right on the end here. That will go somewhere. You'll need to do a little bit of rotation. You'd have to rotate this up to fit the skull in the first place. Then you'd have to rotate these forward to put the ribs on the front of it. But you can imagine that would be it would be a very large beast, larger than a Ravager, considerably larger than a Ravager actually. It would be like just a giant cow-like creature. But it's very clear that these are all part of the same animal, right? There are some interesting things though, like, for instance, we have this is an outlier, and when you look at the wiki, there's some things that don't really make sense. Like, this is a sternum, and some of the sternum entries have actually been removed recently. We also have another outlier, which is this one, which is remarkably symmetric. So we have a 4 and a 1, so that would correspond to medium rib size, 3 and 1. But it's noticed that in the rib cage, because of what happens in an actual rib cage is that the size of the ribs as you go down the ribs does become smaller. So again, that's why it's useful to look at these ribs as reference to know what corresponds to small, medium, large, and very large. And the reason I use these actual sizes to correspond to small, medium, and large, it's not because of the numbers, because they are just numbers in the structure, but because on the wiki it actually specifies that's what they're actually called. So let's just briefly go through the ones. So this is something which I essentially named this myself purely based on this looks like what it would be. It sort of implies as well that we might see a bone slab as well. Because obviously a rib cage, you would expect there to be something there at least. There's the horizontal sternum, which is the only sternum in the entries. We have a small partial rib cage. So you can see we've still got the 3 height, but this can be seen as being bigger than just the 3-1, which we established was small. This is small rib cage structure. And we have the medium rib, the large rib cage structure. So taking that as a whole, you can see the extension on the horizontal is more. 3 sets of large ribs. So you can see it's not quite what you might expect. It's hard to sort of it's trying to go for a different, like It's a different angle, I guess, in terms of where they're buried. And I did rotate these a little bit just to fit in correctly. Then we have one large rib, which you've seen already. And then it says 3 ascending sets of medium ribs. So you can see there's the 4 and the 2. It's kind of confusing though, because the 4 and the 2 did actually correspond to the large over here. Right? But because it could be, I guess you could see that that these ribs over here are sort of the average size rib. So you can imagine like a rib from wherever the median value is of the size of rib is where these singular ribs are. That's how I see it. So for instance, like, yeah, so this is a medium rib cave structure. It could actually be thought of that this could be a small rib cave structure, but as we saw, as I labelled the first one that's why I think this one is actually listed as this on the wiki as well. So it gives more credence to that. 3 large ribs. So it's kind of interesting. You can see the so this is 4. So remember 4 and 2 we said was the average value for a large rib. So this is 4 and 3. Then we have a 4 and 2. Then we have a 3 and 1. So that's kind of like gives an indication of what the scaling is like with the rib size. And then finally we have the very large rib cage structure. Remember that was a 6 and a 2. So it's a 6 and a 2 there. And then we have a 5 here, a 5 and a 2. You'll notice there's this thing, structure integrity, and that's actually relevant for fossils because we can do all of these and we can put in that. So if we then take this and we put it in here, let's take a look what happens. Spawn 1 coal. You see it actually spawns the whole lot as coal. And what tends to happen with fossils, as we'll see in the next section, is that the fossils will spawn with pieces of coal. They're not actually part of a normal coal spawn. They're actually part of this, which is special coal blocks. So if you see like one coal block at Y level 40 to 49 on its own, you can have some hope that you're maybe about to find a fossil. So this coal variant will be the same for all the overworld fossils. If we control click on a structure block, it actually works like a command block. If we then reduce the structure integrity of the fossil and then we load it up, you'll notice there'll be blocks that are missing. And this is how they more generally will spawn in the world.